we have prepared something for you that is a journey and an invitation at the same time.
Ladies and gentlemen, Minister Altmaier, it has been said many times already, aviation has endured one of the hardest hits from the pandemic, and it's striving to survive the biggest crisis of its history. The crisis underlined the need for resilience in our transport system. Investing in the EU's pre-pandemic priorities of sustainability and digitalization will strengthen this resilience while making sure that we have a transport system that is competitive and fit for the 21st century. While doing so, no one should be left out. Before the end of the year, I will present a new strategy on sustainable and smart mobility, setting out, among other objectives, how we see transport contributing to Europe's climate ambition. I know that the focus within your sector is very much on recovery at the moment, and I will support you all the way. Recovery must go hand in hand with measures to address the sector's overall environmental footprint. We plan to approach this challenge from several directions. Besides the renewal of fleets, which can reduce emissions in the short term, one path worth exploring is that of sustainable aviation fuels. The aviation sector has relied too long on fossil energy, and delaying a bold transition is not an option anymore. Our approach is pragmatic, I assure you, and recognizes the need for large-scale investment in new production capacity and infrastructure. Our Refuel Aviation initiative will set out the frame for developing the production and the use of sustainable alternative fuels. We are also relying on research and innovation for both greener fuels and planes. I'm thinking notably of power-to-liquid, which would allow existing planes to fly with a much reduced carbon footprint. At European level, we will be proposing a joint undertaking for clean aviation under Horizon Europe, the next EU research and innovation program, due to take off in 2021. The ambition is to have new disruptive technologies ready by 2030, making it possible for the industry to market these technologies by 2035. The focus is on hybrid electric flying, ultra-efficient propulsion, and aircraft configurations for the short and medium range, and on hydrogen-powered aviation. In parallel to rethinking planes themselves and the fuel they run, we must not forget air traffic management systems. Designed well, ATM allows aviation to maximize the gains from technological advances. This is why we are proposing to re-establish the SESAR joint undertaking. Its focus on digitalization and automation will help optimize flight trajectories and ensure the safe integration of new categories of airspace users, such as drones. Our recent CES2+ proposal will also help optimize trajectories from an efficiency angle and help cut CO2 emissions by up to 10%. These are our medium and long-term plans for the aviation sector. But the action we took early on this crisis helped to stabilize the market and reduce the burden on stakeholders. Having waived the use it or lose it principle for airport slots back in the spring, we recently extended this to cover the winter scheduling season. Going forward, we are now working on an amendment to the slot regulation to ensure that it contains conditions for the pro-competitive and efficient use of airport capacity. I know that the pandemic also made it difficult to comply with certain provisions within the air service regulation and the ground handling directive, so we adopted temporary rules offering relief. Some will be prolonged beyond the end of the year, for example, those that lift the requirements on member states to withdraw the licenses of airlines in temporary financial difficulties. We have offered flexibility under EU budgetary rules on sectoral support, a temporary state aid framework for liquidity and recapitalization, and a European support scheme to keep people at work, known as SURE. The European Commission also proposed an unprecedented recovery package to kickstart the European economy and support future-proof, smart and sustainable mobility. Next Generation EU will definitely have opportunities for aviation. The largest instrument under the Next Generation EU is the Recovery and Resilience Facility, with a total budget of 560 billion euros. I expect the transport sector to be one of the important beneficiaries. The Commission guidance documents identify alternative transport fuels and the Single European Sky as areas that could benefit from that support. This funding will be used by Member States on the basis of national plans. It is key for our sector that those plans address the need of aviation. The Commission also proposes to reinforce InvestEU, whose budget should reach close to 10 billion. Its sustainable infrastructure window is designated to support private investment in transport infrastructure and fleet renewal. I will end my intervention on a note of optimism. With investments, with ambitious objectives, with all players in the sector working together, I'm confident that the sector will emerge from the coronavirus crisis more robust and more sustainable than ever before.
So thank you, Commissioner. That was, of course, from the European Commission, Transport Commissioner Adina Vălean. And Ms. Vălean has by no means a small task drafted out for her. She has been tasked with nothing less by the European Commission than to come up with a comprehensive strategy for sustainable and smart mobility, pushing sustainable transport fuels and helping to bring an end to fossil fuel subsidies in transport. And she said it. She will present a draft of that strategy before the end of the year. So very, very much looking forward to that.
Thank you, Richard. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, due to COVID-19, the Aero Days didn't happen in May. So we actually have the Aero Days during the German presidency of the Council of the European Union. And in response to the crisis caused by the pandemic, Germany, as well as almost all European nations, created recovery packages, some of them also targeting directly or indirectly the aviation industry in its diverse facets, seeing that it was brought to a complete standstill for a number of months. And today, of course, European guiding star is the European Green Deal. We're going to talk about that later on. But in Germany, at the September roundtable on the aviation industry, the future of emission-free aviation was just as much at the center of discussions as were the incentives to enable a fast recovery. The goal, of course, being technological leadership for CO2 neutral aviation. And on that backdrop, we are very happy that we have a very fast replacement for the German Federal Minister for Economic Affairs and Energy, Peter Altmaier, who can't be with us right at the moment, but Thomas Jarzombek, Federal Government Coordinator of German Aerospace Policy, is with us, and as you can see with a wonderful photo, he is on the line, so please, Mr. Jarzombek, take it away.
Okay, und Sie sind live.
So, dear Professor Henke, dear Mr. Winkler, Mr. Ney, and Ms. Simok, ladies and gentlemen. So, first I have to say two things. The first thing is best wishes from Peter Altmaier. As he is right now in quarantine, I shall bring you all the best wishes from him. The second is that it's a pity that I'm not able to see you and you see me. I'm, so to say, completely blacked out. I don't know why. It's the first time in all this corona situation that I have no video here. I guess we have to find out after the event what happened here right now, but I hope you can still hear me in some way. And I want to say at first a thank you for making it possible here at the Berlin Aviation Summit, and this as being a part of the Tandem Aero Days 19 and 20. Launched in May 2019 in Bucharest, and I was there last year. It was a pleasure to travel there to Bucharest, and I remember the nice weather and there being with you in this palace. And it was initiated by Romania's and Germany's presidency. And so first I say a thank you for our Romanian friends for making all this possible. And when I look back last year there in May in Bucharest, nobody could believe what's going to happen when COVID comes, and the last months in this year had a true heavy impact on the whole aviation industry. And this is not only that we are not able to meet in person, but it's more and more a problem, especially for some industries, and the aviation industry is in the core of all these troubles that we are seeing. There is a silver lining, as we see that BioNTech and Moderna and right now also Seneca have presented promising vaccines, but to be honest, when there will be enough people having these vaccines, it's a long way that we have to go, and it is a long winter. And but I'm sure that at one point, I hope this will be next year, we can go back to normal, more or less. And the new normal will be maybe different than the normal that we knew before, but to a normal where we can travel again. And I believe the demand for traveling and also for aviation will be as high as before the crisis, because I know so many people who are really hungry of traveling and seeing the sun again and so on, that I believe that in the moment it will be possible to safely travel and to spend real vacations, then the travel industry will make a push. And nevertheless, also for business travels, I believe that a lot of things we realize are possible via video conferences. But in the end, without a personal contact, a lot of things in the end still don't work. And so nobody really knows for sure where the industry will end up over the next years. But I believe, I'm optimistic that our old business will come back, mostly, I'd say. And we have seen an annual growth of around 5% in all these times before Corona. And everything we heard as a problem was there is such a huge demand for aircraft, and so can we get new planes? And right now, the demand for aircraft was predicted to double by 2030. And so it's also that aviation and the aviation industry has a substantial contribution also to the whole GDP, with the 41 billion euros in turnover in Germany alone last year. And we have 114,000 direct employees in highly skilled jobs producing planes. And if you look at the whole industry of airlines and everything around, we come up to 1 million people. So that's quite huge. And the pandemic has struck our industry very much, and the lost turnover in Germany alone for airlines this year is a minus 70%. For airports, it's a minus 53%. And also, what's the problem? The fleet renewal has come to a halt. And the impact on industry was manageable in the first and second quarter this year due to long payment periods for deliveries that have been already made. But since the middle of the year, pandemic is increasingly affecting the core of the industry. And we see a huge output reduction at Airbus. Let's look, for instance, for the A320, from 63 to 40 aircraft per month. And from the 330, there are only 2 aircraft right now, and the 356. So there's a huge output reduction. And this has clearly impact on the whole supply chain. And we see also job cuts across the whole industry, alone Airbus and MTU, and I don't want to read all this because to stay in a good mood. But in the end, we can say that it's the worst crisis in civil aviation since World War II. And such a quick recovery, as I already said, we will not see. And so the German federal government is bringing billions to the table to safeguard and strengthen the industrial core. So we have general economic actions. For instance, the KfW brings out loans for the companies, or we have the Economic Stabilization Fund called WSF, where we can invest in affected companies. And also we spend a lot of money with the short-term work allowances, which was successful also in the financial crisis 10 years ago. And this, I believe, does help the industry. And we also have actions targeted at the aviation industry in specific. This is, for instance, the stabilization of Lufthansa with around 9 billion euros. The east access to financing for exports of civilian aircraft with 1.4 billion euros. The procurement of projects brought forward, and we have an innovation premium for aviation with around 1 billion euros, which is a fleet modernization program which will subsidize new and more clean airplanes for the airlines. And our aim stays to be climate neutral in aviation by 2050. And the decisive element in the federal government's crisis management strategy are R&D projects. And I believe it's absolutely crucial that companies still invest in R&D. And I know for many it's a problem in equity, and so therefore the first things that are being cut are R&D projects. But in the end, at one point, the crisis will be over, and then it comes up where the ones will succeed that have invested in R&D and have more competitive projects. And with our programs for R&D, we have a special focus on technologies that facilitate comprehensive decarbonization of aviation. And our goal is the zero-emission aircraft. And to support the development of relevant technological building blocks in Germany, we have guided a zero-emission aviation white paper, which is presented by the German Aerospace Center, the DLR, and the German Aerospace Industries Association, the BDLI, in the mid of October. Institutional funding for the German Aerospace Center, which is a further step increased to make up for missing industry contributions, and it's an important contribution to ensuring a continuation of the R&D during this crisis, and this is around 100 million over 2 years. Germany is in a strong position thanks to powerful industrial bases and globally renowned research landscape. And so this is a complement for all our companies and their teams, and also for the DLR and all the ones that are working especially on this research landscape here. And the first hydrogen-powered pilot aircraft with 2 to 4 seats can already take off. And the German Aerospace Center, the DLR, began work to convert a DO-228 to electric engines in 2019. The project is to demonstrate the feasibility of alternative engines for regional feeder flights. And we believe that at some point by 2030, we can realize a small regional aircraft with maybe 20 to 40 seats by 2030. The federal government supports work with funding from the hydrogen strategy and increases funding for hybrid electric engines under German aviation research program LUFO, which is additionally 200 million euros over the next 4 years. And we also invest heavily together with our colleagues from the Ministry for Transportation on creating a hydrogen infrastructure for the airports, because we believe that hydrogen airplanes can only fly if we have, as soon as possible, a valid infrastructure for these planes. And I believe if you look at electric cars, you can see what it's a mess if you have more cars in the field than charging stations. And so in the end, we are learning out of this, and we have a special focus on the infrastructure for hydrogen for airport. And additionally to all this, and we very much appreciate the strong initiative here from Airbus. They presented 3 concepts for zero-emission aircraft powered by hydrogen, and we believe this will be the future. And I think it's right also from the perspective of Airbus, not only to go for a single concept, but to have 3 competing concepts. And in the end, nobody today knows for certain where this will end up, but I believe competing and experimenting with different technologies is key to be ahead of the competition here when it comes to zero-emission aviation. And the climate-neutral aviation cannot achieve through national efforts alone. I believe that's clear. And when R&D resources are scarce due to the crisis, EU support is essential for synergies and best possible outcomes. And the debate around programs like Horizon Europe or Clean Aviation that shows that the energy transition in the aviation industry can only succeed if joint research and innovation efforts are made under the auspice of the EU. And we welcome very much the agreement reached with the EP for an additional 4 billion euros for Horizon Europe, as R&D is truly key when it comes to the competitiveness of our economy for the future. Target funding at key enabling technologies. The aviation industry sets pace for Green Deal, and that means hydrogen, sustainable fuels, renewables, etc. And we have a close cooperation between all stakeholders that's needed to open up new vision for aviation. And the Aero Days are like Davos for the aviation industry. It is the format provided by the European Commission for a leaders' debate on strategy and technology. I am counting on a new climate-neutral normal for the post-COVID-19 period. And I believe, I will stress that again, it's really important because I believe the huge movement that we have seen to get climate neutral, this won't stop only because of Corona. Maybe it's halted a little bit, but as you can see right now, everywhere across Europe, people are willing to get climate neutral, and therefore we cannot stop our efforts here. And it's really crucial to invest in these new kind of technologies also for the aviation industries. And the next Berlin Aviation Summit, and I'm very hopefully on that, will be at the 2022 ILA, the ILA, Innovation and Leadership in Aerospace. And I wish everyone participating in today's summit and the Aero Days Forum tomorrow, and on the day after tomorrow, fruitful discussions and valuable insights. So stay healthy and have a good day here today.
Thank you so much, Thomas Jarzombek, Federal Government Coordinator of German Aerospace Policy, and the outlook for 2022 is a good one. And with that, I turn over to Richard.
Now we have the third keynote opening address under the motto, Aviation for the Future, Change is Now. And with that, the governing body of the International Civil Aviation Organization, the ICAO Council, elected him as president for a three-year term starting January 1st. His election follows an accomplished career in aviation spanning 4 decades, during which he served as General Director of the Italian Airworthiness Authority and Deputy General Director of the Italian Civil Aviation Authority, among other positions. Welcome, Salvatore Sciacchitano. The floor is yours.
Hello. Good afternoon. I hope that you can hear me. Good afternoon from Montreal, dear participants, to the Berlin Aero Days 2020. It's a pleasure for me to bring you my good afternoon from just waking up Montreal. The title of this summit, Aviation for the Future, Change is Now, is extremely timely. We are currently facing a huge change in aviation that will impact its future. As we know, aviation is global, and before the pandemic, it connected people, cultures, and business across the continents. It is essential to many countries' access to regional and global markets. And these connections in turn enhance consumer choice, create jobs, and significantly stimulate tourism and trade. In appreciating that global connectivity and tourism are so fundamental to intercultural understanding, to the peace and economic well-being of the world, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres, went so far as to refer to them as one of the wonders of the world. prior to COVID-19, close to 4.5 billion passengers and 60 billion tons of freight were being carried by global commercial operators each year on just under 40 million flights. The sector has been responsible for providing meaningful employment and sustainable careers to over 65 million men and women worldwide, while contributing more than $2.7 trillion to global GDP. In 2019, our long-term forecasts were showing that both passengers and freight traffic would double globally by 2035. This forecast grew in operations held with the promise of tremendous global economic potential. But with early months 2020 and the announcement of COVID-19 pandemic, aviation suddenly found itself confronted by a new and unprecedented threat. Unlike other infectious disease events we had previously confronted in aviation, COVID-19 restricted the international movements of people and goods to degrees never before witnessed with SARS or Ebola. And as we took measures to protect ourselves and our loved ones, passengers levels globally fell in March and April to just 10%, what had just been seen a few weeks before. Quite obviously, this severe downturn led to some enormous and largely unpredictable impacts on aviation. While air cargo operations are still being depended upon to support our rapidly increasing e-commerce activities and to move vaccines, other perishables and high-value goods where society most urgently need them, commercial airlines today are still facing dramatically reduced passengers' load factors. While in April, passengers' demand had fallen by 90%, ICAO can now estimate that 2020 will land with 60% fewer passengers overall, leading to operator losses globally of almost $400 billion. When COVID-19 pandemic status was confirmed by WHO, ICAO responded very rapidly. The most effective action was the establishment of an aviation recovery task force called CART to develop special so-called takeoff recovery guidelines for air transport, with the objective to support the restart and the recovery of air transport. I wish to appreciate here the participation of industry groups, WHO, and the European Commission in the development of these provisions, among many other international organizations. The CART guidelines are now being implemented by countries, and one bright spot we have seen relates to their recommendations on the establishment of public health corridors. Among the international destinations where those corridors or travel bubbles have now been established, we are seeing the first indications of travelers' confidence being restored. Another factor we have noted is that areas where higher levels of intra-regional routes and operations are proving more resilient to the pandemic's effect. A phase 2 version of the ICAO recovery takeoff guidelines was issued early this month. Amongst the many revised provisions, it now recommends that countries assess their passengers' medical testing options using the risk assessment tools in a new manual which ICAO has just issued for this purpose. The objective is to accelerate every prudent means of restoring public confidence in air travel, including through the promotion of effective tests to replace quarantine requirements. Governments reserve the sovereign right to address a public health threat with whatever measures are necessary to protect the lives of their citizens. But at the same time, they recognize how dire the situation may become if air travel is not reasonably assured. COVID-19 has dramatically changed our lives. Physical meetings have been replaced by virtual meetings. E-commerce has been a tremendous growth. On one hand, according to international transport forecast, traffic should resume close to 2019 levels in 2022, and then should continue to grow substantially at the pandemic rate. On the other hand, however, we cannot deny the fact that the COVID-19 experience will have on the future business travel. For example, more frequent use of technologies for meetings and events, as we are doing today. There is a strong global expectation that we will build back better post-pandemic, both in terms of our emission and overall contributions to sustainability, as has been just mentioned by the Minister of Transport of Germany. I wish to recall that ICAO has already plans for CO2 emission reductions. For example, as this year's CO2 emission, aviation emission must have a neutral growth, regardless of the increase of traffic. Of course, this year and next will generate less CO2 emissions than expected due to the dramatic traffic reduction. But, as I said before, traffic will continue to increase in the long term. For this reason, we are working towards more ambitious goals in the long term. In this regard, I very much welcome the recent commitments of some states, including Germany for first, and airlines to achieve net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. Decisions and actions such as this remind us our unwavering determination as a sector to fulfill our common objectives and of the constant need we face to adopt new realities and technologies. All of this will require significant amounts of new forms of aviation innovation going forward, whether to make travel more resilient in the face of a future pandemic threat, more environmentally sustainable thanks to new propulsion technologies, or to safely integrate the incredible new developments taking place in autonomous, suborbital, and supersonic flight. Artificial intelligence, blockchain, sustainable aviation fuels, and many other innovative technologies will also be part of this evolution. And they will also require changes to how regulators and the standard setters assess and adopt new innovation for global benefit. To meet these challenges, the ICAO Council will establish a high-level forum on innovation with industry leaders. And this will play an important role in how our community cooperates in the important years ahead. This continued solidarity among aviation stakeholders will be significantly dependent upon in the months and the years ahead. And the ICAO will look forward, as always, to the perspectives and the best practices of the European states, European manufacturers, research centers, and operators as we spread aviation's benefit to every corner of the world. And with this, I wish to conclude, to thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you fruitful discussions at this Berlin Aero Days 2020 summit. Thank you very much indeed.
Mr. Sciacchitano, thank you very much, and all the best to Montreal.
Thank you.